Hi, welcome back to Busch History. My name is David Busch, and I'm up to topic 8 in my series on American history, teaching the entire American history course from Columbus to Barack Obama. I've received several emails as to why I'm doing this. I've covered that in the previous introduction, but I'm going to proceed topically. Again, if you have any questions about anything in American history that you can't figure out, I might not figure it out either, but I might have a good shot at giving you an answer. Simply go to bushhistory.net and you can give me an email and ask me anything you want. It has happened. I've gotten several, I've gotten hundreds, but I've gotten in the 15 to 20 range of emails so far, and maybe that'll pick up as we go on. And share this information. Share it with your friends. If your teacher wants to use it in class, by all means. If they get me that I'm wrong on something, let me know. I might not change it, and I might change it, because no one can know everything. Anyway, we're going to continue now with this look at the North and how the North is industrializing while the South is staying stagnant and relying on cotton. So let's get started here. It's industry in the North, 1790, to 1850. Let's get going here. The North was not completely industrialized. That's one of the fallacies about the North. The North was also very rural. And we use an example here called the Springer family. Springer family was in Delaware, and they had slaves. Slaves in Delaware. We don't often think about it that way. The difference between slaves in Delaware and slaves in Mississippi was that if you owned a slave, you were unique, because not everyone owned slaves anywhere. And the north part of the country was becoming more and more rare. And secondly, you didn't own a lot of them because of their cost and certainly the upkeep in the wintertime. The Springers owned one slave. His name was Ace. Anyway, what the Springers did is Ace became a member of the family, and he was working to buy his freedom. I don't have specifics in terms of how Ace was treated, except I'm going to guess is that he was treated fairly well. Those are the accounts of the day from Ace himself. He wrote some of these things after he was freed, and he seemed pretty happy in their care. Let's take a quick look. Slavery on the Springer farm differed from that in the South. His slave Ace was in the process of buying his freedom. By 1790, slavery had been abolished in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. People in the North are working more on milling, and they're working more on manufacturing things. And New England became very important in that manufacturing base because of its ability also to use its various ports and ship things. So other skills became necessary as well. The North had something called the Apprentice System. Copied directly from Europe's Apprentice System, it worked like this. During the pre-industrial time, which we call the domestic system, people worked out of their homes. And the person who did the majority of that work was called the artisan or the craftsman. Under the artisan or the craftsman worked a younger man. He worked there for 3 to 7 years, and the craftsman taught him everything he knew, whether it was weaving, whether it was boot making, whether it was being a blacksmith, whether it was furniture making. It didn't matter. You lived with that craftsman as a member of his family, which could have been good, could have been bad, depending on that craftsman, what he was like, if he was a real taskmaster. But you were his product, not just what he made were his products, you were his product. So he wanted you to leave and be a very good journeyman. You were a journeyman before you became a craftsman. So he went from apprentice to journeyman to craftsman. And if he produced good journeymen, his reputation increased, and other apprentices would want to come and apprentice with him. So at the end of the term, you would become a journeyman, and when you would earn enough money as a journeyman, and a journeyman simply meant that you worked for other craftsmen, not as an apprentice, but as an employee, so you're actually paid. So that craftsman could have a journeyman and an apprentice working for him. When you earned enough money, you would open your own shop, if you like. You would probably work out of your home, we call it shop, but nevertheless, you would become a craftsman. So at the end of the term, he would become a journeyman, and when he earned enough money, he would open a shop of his own and finally become a master craftsman, and the cycle continues. Really a pretty good idea, because you learned how to do the trade from a master. And you cycle around and you teach someone again and again and again. There are trades today that are very much like that. One that I can think of near to my heart is teaching. In order for you to become a teacher, you have to observe and be a student teacher and teach under the auspice of a cooperating teacher who hopefully instructs you correctly, and then you become a teacher on your own. And then you know what happens? Sometime later, if you want, you can take a student teacher as well. So let's keep going. This was a male-dominated society, hence the term patriarchal. It's a patriarchal way of life, yes, and a way of wife as well. The husband made all the decision. Single women lived at home typically, and they relied on their families for support. Lowell Mills will be the exception to that as we go forward. It'll be the beginning of women leaving the home. When women did take jobs, they were typically along the lines of helping other women with their children. They would tutor from time to time. They were some of the first teachers in the United States. They would be sewers. They would help sewing things, sewing linens and the like. And women did not have property rights. So if a parent died and there was a son and a daughter, the son got everything. If a woman was married and her husband died and there was wealth left behind, it would go right by her and become her son's. Or if there were no children yet, depending on where you live, you had a specific amount of time that you had to remarry. So someone could manage your finances and your property because you were thought to be incapable of doing that. How bizarre is that? So some of these marriages, especially the second marriages, were done simply for the purpose of keeping the property, which is pretty sad. Entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who take risks to make money. They are people who take risks in business. They're also called capitalists because you have to invest capital. Capital is investment money. And the whole idea of capitalism is investing money to make more money. So capitalism is the pursuit of profit as opposed to other systems in the world. Socialism is the pursuit of people. Communism is the pursuit of the community. There are certainly all kinds of perversions of those terms that have occurred, but those are the basis. That's the basis of those terms. Anyway, let's take a look at the entrepreneurs. John Jacob Astor. He was a furrier. He didn't trap the furs. He didn't skin them. He didn't cut them. He didn't even handle them. He bought them from trappers on the west coast of the United States and arranged to sell them to people who were selling them in China. So he sold them to the Chinese. He was a middleman. John Jacob Astor was a successful entrepreneur making a fortune in the Pacific Northwest fur trade with China. Through his company, the American Fur Company, he ended up dominating the fur trade. When he retired in 1834, he was known as the richest man in America. And the funny thing about it is, he never got his hands dirty. He was simply moving money to buy and sell things. He bought the furs from the trappers. He sold them to the people who were shipping them. Very interesting way of making money. The beginning of not getting your hands dirty and simply investing, hence the term entrepreneur. The putting out system, as you will recall, is taking the tasks that were done by an artisan or a craftsman and dividing them up into different shops or different households. I use the bootmaker as an example. First you start out with, you have to tan the leather. And then that tan leather is picked up at the end of the day, brought to another house. And what's going to happen there is that leather is going to be cut to size. Then it'll be put out at the end of the day and picked up by someone with a wagon and brought to another house. And when it's cut, after it's been cut to size, it'll be shaped to boot or shoe shapes. And then it will be stitched. And then it'll be brought to another house and a sole will be put on it. That is called the putting out system, because the work was put out at the end of the day to be brought to its next step. It is the beginning of assembly line manufacturing. The Industrial Revolution did indeed begin in Britain, but we're going to take it and we are going to expand it. I was going to say improve upon it. That's not really fair, but we're going to expand it. We start to have a variety of machines that are based on water wheels. Most of these mills were built on water sources, heavy flowing creeks or rivers, and they would spin a wheel. That wheel would spin. There'd be a belt on that wheel. The belt would go up into a building. It would spin another wheel, and a series of belts would spin all over the mill, turning machines. And some of those machines were the flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the spinning mule. They all had to do with different parts of the cloth making process, whether it was weaving it, whether it was cutting it, whether it was sizing it or stitching it. They all had to do with part of it. These factories initially all depended on water power. In time, there would be other energy sources, and they would transport water and use steam, and the steam engine for it, which is still water power. But they're using water wheels initially. And because of that, and attitudes in the North about industrialization and investment, manufacturing and mills occurred much more in the North than they did in the South. We have more rivers in the North than we have in the South. The South, we have more open fields. Yes, there are rivers, but they don't connect as well in the South as they do in the North. Here's an example of a flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the spinning mule, and the water frame. You can clearly see the wheel and the belt, and then the wheel in the belt in the spinning jenny and in the spinning mule. If you look a little closer, you can also see it in the water frame. Here it is on the bottom. The belt's going to the bottom of the frame, and the top is connected to another belt. So this is really a system of belts and pulleys. A race against the British. If you remember, going all the way back to the Revolution, the British was the industrial center of the world. Well, now the United States wants to be the industrial center of the world. So we're going to try to outpace them in our manufacturing capabilities. Because the British realize the value of their machinery, they're not willing to give out their secrets. The Americans had to rely on getting information from ex-factory workers who emigrated from England. One of those was Sam Slater. In 1789, the same year that George Washington becomes president, Sam Slater left England for America. Through memory, he built copies of the latest British machinery. So he's an early industrial spy, and it's interesting that he becomes this industrial spy the same exact year that George Washington is president of the United States. So industrialization is going to begin in the United States at the same time the federal system actually begins in the United States. Slater's mill became the most advanced mill in the United States. Francis Lowell had also gone to England, and he is also taking a look at these weaving centers and these mill centers, and he decides he wants to take it one step further and build his mill town. His mill town is, the idea behind a mill town is, let's keep the workers together. If they're all in the same place, we don't have to worry about whether they're going to show up on time. We'll blow a whistle or ring a bell. We don't have to be concerned whether they're getting enough sleep. We'll have a rule that says we have to turn off the lights. We don't have to worry whether they're drinking too much. We'll have a rule that says no alcohol, or no alcohol certain days or certain times. We don't have to worry about their moral problems because we're going to make sure there's a church, and we're going to require that they go to church. So he comes up with this mill town idea in which he controls every aspect of a worker's life. So who's going to want this? Who's going to want to go to a town where every aspect of your life is controlled? Women. It was a patriarchal society, and a father might be comfortable sending his daughter to a place where he knows she's being taken care of, where she can't be taken advantage of. And she can make money and send it back to the farm. So what we have out of that is we have Lowell Mills. Lowell Mills opens up in the early 1820s, 1821 to be exact. And Francis Lowell had died. He died in 1817, but the plan had been underway and his business partners are going to complete this plan. And we have the beginning of Lowell Mills. Lowell Mills was just as I described it. The dominant worker, or the dominant part of the workforce, were women. And they lived in the town. They went to church in the town. They shopped in the town. There were rules about when they got up and when they went to bed. There were The diet was sometimes controlled, and a lot of the money actually stayed in the town, because when you worked in the town, you had a shop in the town. Where did the money stay? The money stayed in the town. And at first, Lowell Mills was very successful, and women loved going to Lowell. Unfortunately, during the 1830s, the economy in the United States started to tank. There wasn't as much demand for some of the textiles, as Egypt was now growing much more cotton, and manufacturing was picking up in Europe because some of the problems between France and England had subsided. So there's less demand, and when there's less demand and more immigration into the United States, because now we have more workers competing for jobs, they start to cut the wages in Lowell Mills. Now, of course, Francis Lowell is long dead, so there's no discussion with Francis Lowell about any of this, and it's simply business. So what was very good about Lowell Mills for women is now going to become very bad, as they're going to become poorly paid, and every vice you can imagine will become part of this mill town. And it's an unfortunate turn, but it shows the evolution of the American worker from valued worker to what was simply called an operative, someone who simply operated machines. The idea of industrialization being based on interchangeable parts. Eli Whitney, as I had discussed previously, is the father of interchangeable parts in the United States. And when we get these interchangeable parts, what it's going to allow us to do is have these factories set up where people just assemble things. They don't have to think about it, they're all going to fit, they're just going to assemble them. And once again, these people are going to be called operatives. It does make production much faster, for sure, and uniform, which is good as well. You can just get a part to fix something, as opposed to having to redo the entire tool or item or whatever it might be. It was dubbed the American System of Manufacturing because it was unique to the United States. It had not occurred anywhere else in the world. The labor system had now changed. The putting out system, as mentioned prior, had destroyed the apprentice system. There's no reason to have an apprentice anymore, because now we're only doing one task. Unskilled laborers became a dominant part of the workforce now, because they only had to do one task. They could be showed it very quickly, and they would go on from there. Women were not allowed in most jobs unless they were deemed appropriate. Lowell Mills is an example as appropriate. And we start to have a system of cash economy, where now you buy things with money as opposed to just bartering around, because entrepreneurs weren't dealing with bartering, they were dealing with the moving of capital, which was cash money for the purpose of investment. Workers start to rebel as the workers start to be treated like the products in the factories. Women lead the first strikes. In Lowell in 1834, as I mentioned previous, the economy had tanked, and women are now leading this uprising. These strikes were considered wrong, they were considered unfeminine, and the factory owners thought that women were not grateful for the jobs they had, but women were being treated like trash. And there are many stories from Lowell Mills about how women had become alcoholics and had become prostitutes to earn extra money because the wages had been cut so low. Owners would claim that wage cuts were inevitable and were always able to find other workers. So what happened now? There's no value in the human being anymore. The worker is simply a product of the population in the United States being used in the factories, and the factory owner would simply want to pay as little as possible to use that worker. This market revolution had now caused a new kind of social order in the United States. We're now going to have three legitimate classes. We're going to have a lower class, a middle class, and an upper class. Caused by the market revolution, three classes, upper, middle, and lower class. This evangelism was occurring in the United States as well, a return to religion by these people, Charles Finney and Lyman Beecher being examples of them, by these evangelists who were guaranteeing salvation for good behavior and doing it on the street corners. Sinners, gather around, brothers and sisters, listen to me. I will guarantee you entrance to the kingdom of heaven if you do as I tell you to do. So, what happened was, you now had control by religion. Evangelist, you're on the eve of the angel. You're speaking to someone who is speaking to you on the eve of the angel. Maybe this person is the angel in your eyes. So the whole social fabric in the United States is changing. Catherine Beecher writes the Treatise on Domestic Economy. This treaty on domestic economy told women how to behave. This is how a good woman behaves in a household and how important she is in a household. it was good for women to be professionalized, but also pigeonholed them again into the way you had to behave. Another thing starts to occur is we start to have a drop-off in the amount of births in the United States because children were expensive and workers were needed in the factories. So women were starting to work more and more in the mills, granted, in acceptable jobs, but it was hard to rear children. They were expensive, someone had to watch them, so birth control starts to be used in the United States. We have something called the rhythm method, which is based on a woman's fertility, her menstrual cycle. We start to have coitus interruptus, which is withdrawal. Man withdraws from the woman before orgasm is achieved. And we also start to have the idea of using condoms. Condoms were considered dirty. They were sheaths that went over the penis like a modern condom does, and they were made from animal intestines. And certainly they were dirty, and a lot of bacteria was spread, and a lot of venereal diseases was spread this way, and it's thought to be only used by prostitutes. But this is now another way of looking at how reproduction is occurring in the United States, because now we have organized birth control. Going to leave this here. I like to include questions and answers when a topic is rather deep and complicated, as is North and South relationship is. So I'm going to stop here, and the next segment will be a series of questions and answers on industry in the North.